So again, I would like to repeat, those who would need translation, look at the bottom side of your screen, press the globe icon. It has interpretation and you can choose English and Arabic there. So for this session, we will have a report back of what happened in Sharm el-Sheikh, the 27th Conference of Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreements. So there were simultaneous negotiations that happened there and also committee meetings. So those speakers that we invited to speak will share the various meetings, what happened on the various meetings that they were following, apart from the general analysis that we all have of the whole meeting and where it will go to. And then the succeeding sessions, we have a session on the economy and climate. We also have a session tomorrow on social justice and climate. And then we have the last session about moving forward, how do we build solidarity and strengthen our solidarity, not just on the process of the COP, but also beyond COP. Because even in Sharm el-Sheikh as well, there were all the discussion that if we look at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Conference of Parties, this global governance on climate is not working, as we have seen how the developing countries and the developed countries clashes in all the meetings. And that is also the cause why we are now on COP27 and we're not getting any closer to solving the challenges and the problems and the growing impacts of climate change. So this is a very complex issue. It's connected to many issues, not just on the environment, but also climate change is now a major economic issue. It's a security issue. It's a social issue. It's a issue on equality and equity. At the same time on a gender issue. So we will hear all that, and apologies for this delay because we did not foresee that we will have a problem in our hotel. So my name is Dorothy Guerrero. I'm facilitating this meeting, this press session. I work with Global Justice Now, and I have been following the negotiation since 2007. This is my 8th Conference of Parties that I attended since 2007. And like many who will speak today, Eduardo, and also the other speakers in the whole 4 sessions that we will have, we'll also look back and discuss what changed, what advanced, what we gained, what victories, no matter how small, we gained in this conference. So I think without much ado, I would like to call Mamdouh Habashi to give us a welcome and officially start our webinar.
I would like to welcome all those who are participating in this webinar, which consists of our party that has been hosted by the Egyptian Organizing Committee and Transform Europe. We hope that during this webinar that it brings about a new stance that would result in a movement that saves this planet, that it adopts the essence of what we...
My name is Marga Ferrer. I'm the co-president of Transform Europe, one of the organizations helping in co-organizing this webinar, who has been very difficult, by the way, which is a symptom of what is happening. So I thank you very much for attending this webinar, which I think is absolutely essential. What we are going to speak in these days is something that we would love to do in Cairo, but we couldn't. I think this is part of our task during these 2 days, is to think and rethink the alternative and strategies for social movement, academics, intellectual, political parties to push for a new agenda to stop climate change in this idea that we call in the seminar, building a global solidarity movement. And just only want to thank all the people who in very difficult conditions have worked for this webinar to happen, particularly, of course, the Socialist People Alliance Party in Egypt, but also Global Justice Now with Dorothy Guerrero, or Acción Ecológica, or our friend Fatma Kafaji from Alternative from Arabic Feminist. And of course, I would like also to thank Roland Kulk for Transfer Europe for all the work they have done to make this webinar possible. So let's make our best effort, because I think there is a lot of intelligence in this room to share ideas and put together in order to push for a social agenda for stopping climate change. So thank you very much. And I give the floor to Dorothy for the first one.
I came to COP27 not specifically to policy advocacy, but as Latin American coordinator of TCJ and for campaigning. And then I am not the best person for having a detailed assessment of the text of the COP27, but I can say some things. For the first, we think as TCJ that the establishment of loss and damage fund is more a political win than financial, in terms of the recognition, at least implicitly, of a climate debt. We think that despite it took 3 decades since the UNFCCC establishment in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, we think this is one of the most relevant formal climate justice pact in many years of the negotiations. But looking back at the history of agreements and compromises in the framework of UNFCCC, I am not so optimistic about the effective transfer of resources to the affected countries and people. But to have it in the official text is very relevant, a very relevant fact, not only at the international level, but at national and local, to establish policies and demands for reparations. On the other side, it will be very necessary to ensure that the new instrument, the Loss and Damage Fund, will be used effectively for reparations to restore ecosystems without offsettings and privatizations, and for local economies, and will not be, again, an instrument of rich countries and corporations to continue imposing false solutions, and a kind of restoration oriented to strengthen neoliberalism in our countries. This is linked with the other relevant results of COP27 that confirmed and expanded the speculative carbon market schemes and didn't establish barriers to the fossil fuels extracting and burning. This possible distortion of the loss and damage fund could only be avoided with social mobilization and public policy incidents at all levels, international, national, and local, and with strong positions and alliances of third world countries that have the will to really change the social and economic paradigm. From my Latin American coordinations role, I am very happy with the communication and articulation activities we had in COP27, involving climate justice activists, from several countries of our region. We were very, very far from Latin America. We organized a press conference with great activists from Latin America, like Yvonne Llanes. She is here and will participate in the webinar. And we had also a regional assembly with more than 40 participants who shared a skeptical approach to the UNFCCC negotiations. And we called to work harder at national level and from the territories to push for a paradigm shift in our region, which is going through a relatively good period of political and social processes in our region.
Indeed, attending the COP is most of the time frustrating, and sometimes your spirits are lifted. You see a sliver of hope. Now we have that loss and damage, but of course, we also need to remind ourselves that as long as there's no clear money yet, it will just be another empty promises. And for those who are following this process, we can be reminded that in COP15 in Copenhagen, when the developed countries said that, okay, we will offer $100 billion per year to the developing countries by 2020, we are now 2022, and that hasn't happened yet. So in all these clashes, there might be a perception that in a UN climate COP, all the world leaders and business leaders and civil society leaders gathered together to save the planet. But in reality, it is actually a very contested terrain because countries are negotiating for their interest and they are fighting for their interests. So for a long, long period, you have in terms of the climate finance for the developing countries to help them. There are two views as well on that, because there is a view that they need the money, the developing countries need the money to help them address climate change. It's of course true, because nowadays the extreme weather impacts are getting stronger and also very difficult to predict. But at the same time, the developing countries are also saying this is not assistance, this is not aid, this is not a sort of goodness from the developed countries. This is compensation, this is reparation for all the emissions historically done by all the developed countries. Because if we look from the very beginning, 1991, when before the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was formed, there's also that allotment, or there's also already that discussion about who are the countries that have been emitting for the last 150 years before the others. So that has characterized many of the COP. So it is indeed good that after 30 years, we had the loss and damage. So I also, at this point where I'm also putting in, since I don't see Lydia and Nemo online. I'm
together to mobilize for justice within different countries, but also to mitigate the impacts, the worst impacts, which are borne, as we all know, by workers with already existing precarities. My 6 impressions are as follows. Firstly, yes, the debate's huge. The expectations of popular movements are huge. The expectations of oppressed communities and their trade unions and their formations, informal or formal, are huge. But we should remember that this particular summit, all others before it and all others after it, are a limited space. And that's the impression I saw so very strongly in Sharm el-Sheikh. What is the limited space? The ghost in the room, the ghost of capitalism. It is not, it is the demon of capitalism, will never be discussed. And the issue that capitalism would solve this crisis is an impossibility, is a historic impossibility. So in some ways, I definitely, at Sharm el-Sheikh, ended up lowering my ambition as to what is possible in this space. So within this space, what is possible is what I think are incremental advances, useful, important to act as an elixir to mobilize people's formations, but obviously will always be limited. So if we were to expect an agenda of decolonization coming through this process, I don't think it is going to happen. But these conversations can always advance. So that's my first impression. My second impression is on the continued mobilization, the continued marginalization of civil society in subsequent COPs. Sharm el-Sheikh presented to us the marginalization of popular movements in agenda setting, in the kind of conversations, in the kind of format and design of the climate conference itself. You were not allowed to take names of countries. It is said these are UNFCCC rules. It is also said these are Egyptian rules. People were debashed. People were asked by security forces. And this is not particular to Egypt, mind you. So it happened elsewhere as well, we know. So the continued processes of marginalization of civic spaces or civil society spaces within the COP, in setting the agenda, in designing the process, in being allowed to ask questions, in being not allowed to ask questions, in being pushed to not even protest here. So in some ways, I see this advancing step by step. As on the other hand, in the world, we see tendencies of fascism arising. We see tendencies of obviously of religious polarization and what is called chauvinistic nationalism arise. So that's the second thing I want to say. And in this sense, I don't expect wonders in Dubai. And in this sense, perhaps my impression is possibly for progressive thinkers, progressive activists, left liberals, left radical left, and others to think of a people's COP, where movements, popular movements of those most impacted, and not just the NGOs who represent them, should really be the leaders in setting agendas, setting spaces, and setting the trajectory of journey. A people's COP could possibly be an alternate COP. So I'll park this comment here for a possible discussion. Now, in terms of some of the important issues, yes, loss and damage. I have in the media, and like others, Dorothy and others, DCJ, and many others, my own other organizational colleagues have celebrated the 30 years of struggle, and the fact that loss and damage fund came into reality. This will certainly make possibility of transfer of resources from the north to the south in an incremental manner, however little. And there are obviously debates. The Indian Environment Minister yesterday, in a piece where I am quoted as well, said that India is never going to pay up to the global north for loss and damage that they did not create. The Chinese have already, I'm told, in the process of setting up a South-South fund, and that's important space. So in a sense, it's good. Whenever it happens, maybe end of next year, maybe in Dubai, maybe even later, but whatever incremental, it is great. But I want to give my opinion that this is not reparations. Reparations are about decolonization and the history of colonialism. So I would not like us to minimize the loss and damage fund. It is incremental, it is a welcome step, I welcomed it. But I would not like to join views which call this reparations. Reparations are about the centuries of accumulation and oppression and violence, and that is a big substantive agenda. But perhaps this advances that agenda. So I'll stop here. I want to say the other impression I have on the advance is this particular advance, this COP, of phasing out of all fossil fuels. Now, incidentally, the move came from India. It was a tactical gambit. They did not push it too much, but the conversation it sparked and the sympathy it sparked from several countries is an important agenda to pick up in Dubai, in my opinion, and beyond. So this conversation was an interesting conversation, even as I spent kilometers traversing the large expanse of Sharm el-Sheikh, the COP area in Sharm el-Sheikh, going from one meeting to another. The other great impression I have and the great inspiration I have is the organizing of indigenous people. So I think particularly at this COP, but also before that, the coming together of indigenous peoples of the world, the coming together of tribals of the world, as we call them, from all continents, is a welcome, wonderful step of mobilization, which should only be given much more sails in its wings from all of us. So I think that is a welcome outcome. I celebrate it, and this outcome got much more energy from the arrival of the incumbent President Lula to the seat. So I think this is welcome, and as Lula has said and invited people to Amazon, to the COP in Amazon, I think that might be a potential game changer in future. So this is something I want to say. Now, quickly on the question of two other worries, and before I go on to my last, yes, thank you. So I'll speak slowly. My one other worry and one other need for us to organize better is this agenda of debt cancellation. So whether in the pre-final text or whether in the final text, you do have paras which are talking about the issue of debt, and that's important and that's good, but minus its linkage to climate justice, minus its central linkage to the question of climate. So for us, and Didi is not here today, but Dottie is and others are, and you have been leading these processes. It is important to push the question of debt cancellation back on. So it's not about restructuring of debt alone. We should leave it at. That's what the current agenda talks about. We will mildly restructure debt, privatize debt and things like. The other big thing that I want to speak about, and the worrying thing that I want to speak about, is this push the corporate sector, the private sector is making on ocean geoengineering and other such technical solutions, such as green hydrogen. It is very, very worrying. I think those conversations among progressive thinkers, movements, civil society actions cannot be lost. And I think that's the red flag to me for where the future of these COPs is proceeding. So I mean, maybe Dottie in her remarks will speak to these issues, but I think that's really a red flag. And the conversations I went to, and the whole issue of public and private is becoming a very big red flag. It's always a red flag. And therefore, I come to the other last bit, and that's the hopeful one. Remarkable unity of the global south. I mean, there were bumps, there were co-options, there were attempts to break it, but G77 plus China stood together. And that to me is one big hope and use for other processes of global negotiations when I exited Sharm el-Sheikh late night of day before yesterday. I would like to thank everybody for giving me a patient listening, and thank you for this opportunity. These are my individual remarks. If you do not agree with them, expunge them. But this is what I centrally felt. I personally have come to this first COP. It was an intense, energizing experience, despite the Coca-Cola variety of socialism that we saw with free Coca-Cola, free water, Coca-Cola.
مرحبا جميعا. شكرا دوريثي لهذا التقديم وشكرا.
Thank you, Dorothy, for this introduction. I would like to thank you all for allowing me to be here. As Dorothy have said, I've been present at the COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, and I've been attending on behalf on the global social and economic forum, and also the Jordanian feminist group. My remarks would be regarding 2 points. One of them regarding climate change, and
عدالة مناخية دون الحديث عن
and
حقوق الإنسان.
a point
No
was
justice
raised
without
that there is no
human rights. وكان هذا
that
الشعار بشكل أساسي هو
there
الشعار
should be
الذي
no talking about
يعني
justice
حملناه
as long
طول
as
فترة
there's no
العمل
talking about human rights.
المتابعة والمراقبة وأيضا التدخلات
And
أثناء اجتماعنا مع بعض
there were
المجموعات كالمجموعة
we were
العالمية، مجموعة الصين،
under surveillance,
77
and there were many
وسبعة وسبعين
interventions,
مجموعة
and
أيضا حتى مجموعة
there were
المظلة.
interventions during
المفروض
77
أننا
and
حملنا
China,
هذا
even
الشعار
during
بشكل
the
كبير، لأننا نريد أن
umbrella
نؤكد على
group.
نقطتين أساسيتين في
We
هذا
were
الكوب. كنت أقول أن
I was
العمل
saying that
في هذا الكوب تحديدا حمل
working
شعارات كبيرة مرتبطة
during
بحقوق الإنسان والعدالة
COP27,
المناخية، وهذا كان في مستوى
it
أو في آخر
included
شيء جيد
many
في
slogans
زيادة
regarding
الفهم
human
وزيادة العمل
rights.
على القضية
It was
المناخية
a very good
كقضية
thing in
عدالة.
order to
عندما
shed
نتحدث عن
light
التمويل وتحدث
on
زملائي قبلي
the
عن التمويل،
global issue
التمويل
of global
أعزائي لا
warming.
يحل مشكلة التغيرات المناخية. التغيرات
However,
المناخية
if you're
اليوم
talking
تؤثر
about
علينا ونحتاج
funding
التمويل
doesn't
لعلاجها،
solve the
نعم،
problem.
ولكن
We know
حصر
that we need
القضية
the funding.
الأساسية
However,
لقضية
but
التغيرات
to
المناخية بعلاج الضرر
just
ليس منعه.
sum up
هذه قمة يعني
the problem
تسطيح
in just
الموضوع، أو نتحدث أنه قد
funding that
أبعد
will be
كثير من النشطاء
making the
عن
whole
الهدف
thing
الأساسي
very shallow,
الذي
because
يجب أن
many
نعمل
activists
له،
have been
وهو
talking about the
التخلص التدريجي
original
والتخلص
aim,
التدريجي
which
والفوري،
is
أي
to
البدء بالتخلص من الوقود
reduce
الأحفوري والبدء بالتخلص من
fossil
جميع
fuel and to
مسببات
eliminate
التغير
it,
المناخي
and
وليس
all the
فقط
causes.
معالجة أضراره. في السابق كنا نحمل ملف التكيف، وكان ملف التكيف أيضا ملف موجه للدول النامية والفقيرة، ليقول لها أن موضوع التغيرات المناخية موضوع أمر واقع، وعليكم أن تواجهوا، وعليكم أن تتكيفوا، وعليكم أن يزيد لديكم المنعة المجتمعية لمواجهة ما سيحدث. وأيضا هذا الكلام غير عادل بشكل أو بآخر، لأننا إذا
some of the
تحدثنا
words
عن
that
أننا
have been
علينا
said
أن
were
نواجه وعلى
unjust.
الدول فقط أن
We
تدفع،
said that
هذا
we
يعني
need
أننا
to
بالتالي سندفع
advocate
كلفة
for
أكيد. يعني
action
الموضوع
against
لن يكون
global
حله جذريا عبر
against
التكيف
climate
وعبر
change,
الدفع
and
وعبر ملف الخسائر والأضرار.
modern
الملف الأول الذي
countries
يجب
and
على
advanced
من
countries
يحمل ملف
should
العدالة
pay for
المناخية يجب أن يحمل ملف
those
التخلص
costs that
التدريجي من
we are
الوقود
going to
الأحفوري
bear,
إنتاجا
and we should
واستهلاكا
focus on
بشكل
the
أساسي،
gradual
والتحول نحو العدالة، نحو
focus on the gradual
عدالة الطاقة ترتبط بنقطتين أساسيتين: نقطة التكنولوجيا وتحولها نحو الدول
stepping away
الدول
from fossil fuel. We should
وأيضا
talk.
استخدامها
I'm hearing two
بشكل
voices.
أساسي بديل عن الطاقة
And to
الملوثة
use such and to
بشكل
use
أو بآخر.
renewable energy
النقطة
and clean energy one way or the other.
المترجمين مش قادرين، محدش بيجري وراك. خد الوقت، اتكلمي بالراحه من فضلك، ارجوكي.
أنا بعتذر أستاذي، يمكن بعتذر أنا بحاول والله.
Sorry, I'm trying to slow down.
حاضر. شكرا. أتمنى أنكم تسمعونني جيدا.
I hope that you can hear me clearly. I am one of the colleagues saying that we cannot hear clearly. I hope you're hearing me well. I think the internet.
سأعود بشكل أو بآخر إلى
one way or the other. I will try to go back to the second point that should be on the top of our priorities regarding global equity, about the final text that we have received from COP27. The first thing, it's about the recommendations of global from COP27. First of all, we wanted to have a statement regarding human rights, so that we should, regarding the final statement of COP27 regarding the human rights, and this was going to be in the final statement. However, this was withdrawn, and it was withdrawn. It was
العامة للأمم المتحدة الذي عقد في أكتوبر 2021 وصوتت أكثر من
many
دولة على أن
161 countries before voted that, Mr. Mamdouh. So I will start where I ended a few seconds ago. I wanted to say that during the COP27, we have tried in so many ways to establish the language of humanitarian from the point of human rights. We were attending the COP27, and we have attended before COP26. Since that time, industrial countries and major corporates are stalling. They are stalling about what is clearly in front of their eyes: the consumption, addiction to use fossil fuel, which is the main thing which causes what we are witnessing right now of catastrophes, and which will happen in the future. So far, Dorothy have said that we have requested since 2009, they have claimed they have requested about 100 billion US dollars until 2020. So far, only 15% of that cost have been paid. And the surprise, what is surprising is that how such funds were paid and how projects were funded through those projects were funded through funds. These projects were made in form of loans that were added to the national debts. So we're talking now about manipulation of the COP's outputs over several years. The same thing happened in COP in Paris Convention. When COP Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 was announced, it was a call for implementation. When we're talking about implementation, then we're talking about serious steps to establish networks. And to be honest, her voice is breaking up, and to establish San Diego network, which is the fund for damage and losses, which was established, or the thought of establishing started after Warsaw Mechanism. It would be a network to exchange information and to protect the vulnerable groups like women, youth, and the most vulnerable groups that are less resilient to climate change. But in each COP, those requests were delayed until the San Diego Convention. But if we're talking about funds, we know that many people were quite relieved that now there will be a fund for damage and loss that shall be created. But then we come to the point is who's going to pay, when it's going to pay, and how it's going to pay. They're going to pay. These are the three questions. And what countries that will be eligible for receiving those funds? Will drought be considered damage and loss? And Jordan is the second country around the world which suffers from drought. And forecast says that we are going to lose 82% of the rainfall in Jordan. That means we are going to lose our water resources, and it will destroy our
كميات
of course, it will not show that our infrastructure will be damaged like what happened in Pakistan, but we are losing our water resources, and this will affect our relationship with Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. We are going to be one of the groups that will be vulnerable. Is Jordan going to be one of those countries that will be funded by this fund?
قد يعتبروا إنشاء هذا الصندوق هو تحديدا للكاريبي وإفريقيا، ولكن
some people might think that the establishing of this fund is basically directed to the Caribbean area and African areas and some parts in Asia. Therefore, we need to talk about which countries are going to be eligible for funding through this fund and what are the bases. Also, there was the group 77 and China made a proposal, and they said clearly that 4 different entities will administer this fund, and we have made a statement regarding these funds, and we made a statement that we need to be considered among those countries. Also, COP28 in Dubai, they said it's going to be that will be more elaborative what's happening, and countries should work to be included in the fund for damage and loss. In some countries, negotiators are not permitted into the negotiation rooms, and we might not know what's happening. I've asked other Arab negotiators whether Asia is going to be when I ask Arab negotiators whether the West of Asia is going to be included in the negotiation rooms, other negotiations were surprised that West Asia was not included. The last and final point I would like to say, and at which I'm going to end my talk here, the issue that negotiations didn't go beyond the Glasgow Convention. They are talking about the mitigation. Nobody have spoken about the gradual dropping or elimination of fossil fuel. And during Glasgow and during India, those expressions, these terminologies, whether mitigation or gradual forsaking of fossil fuel, was much more in discussion than in Sharm el-Sheikh. Also, we have seen many corporates that greenwash their hands by participating in COP27, like Coca-Cola, which is not acceptable. How can we accept, as organizers of such conference, to have such corporates present? They are responsible for the pollution. Also, some people were not allowed to participate or to attend or to discuss or to negotiate in COP27. What we have witnessed this year is the lack of accessibility to attend the events of COP27. Lots of my colleagues in COP27 were not allowed to participate, plus the high cost of participation in the COP27. I'm talking about air tickets, hotel accommodations, and the exaggerated cost. These things should be taken in consideration in future events, and the UN should take such expenses in consideration. All UN organizations should allow all parties to be able to access badges, and should provide accessibility for all convoys and all attendees to attend all events in the COP, and they should be allowed to all rooms. People should be allowed access to attend negotiations. They shouldn't voice their opinions through demonstrations or through the streets. People should be invited to participate so that our voice could be heard during negotiation rooms, and we should also participate in supporting our national convoys. I would like to tell you the truth. Many of the vulnerable countries and the developing countries, those who do not have much experience when it comes to negotiations, they lose a lot. However, NGOs and civil society have more experience in negotiations, but unfortunately, civil society is not permitted to attend such negotiations. Lobbyists control negotiations.
What Hala was mentioning about observers not being able to attend the negotiation, because in the UN arrangements, it's the governments who are parties, but also we have noticed that there's also a lot of party overflows. So party refers to the negotiators, the government representatives, and many of them are in various ministries from their country. And what I mentioned earlier about the BP CEO who managed to get in as representative of Mauritania. So it is in the news as well that you have the BP chief executive Bernard Looney attended the COP as official party member of Mauritania. So it's a myth. How can a BP CEO suddenly be in the official party delegation of Mauritania? It is Hala also mentioned about the $100 billion per year that was promised in COP15 in Copenhagen. Actually, they have not completed the 100 billion and it's not yet coming. The last report is that they managed to put together about 78% of that. But the thing is, it is not yet coming. No country in the developing countries has seen or received that money yet. And we are hoping, or we need to push in the succeeding meetings, that this loss and damage fund, which in the draft text might be operationalized starting 2014, that doesn't go in the same history as the COP15 promise, the $100 billion per year promise. So it is indeed that a reality that in the COP, it is not just about reducing emissions. It's not just about pushing the countries, especially the countries in the north, to reduce their emission, which they have not done. And that is the reason why last COP was very it was the very, very low confidence. It started in a situation where the parties don't trust each other, because for the last 26 years, the developed countries have not fulfilled their promise, either on raising their ambition on emission reduction, nor on putting finance for the developing countries. And when you say finance as well, these are different finance. Loss and damage is just one, it's a third pillar, but there's also finance for mitigation, finance for adaptation. Excuse me, we are outside here now. All of us, I think, have a cough. So I am happy to see, we have two more speakers. I'm happy to see that Nemo Bassi from Nigeria, from HOMEP, also just joined us in. So I think without much ado, I would like to invite Nemo Bassi to speak now.
It's a big privilege to be a part of this conversation, something that the system would like to abort, and which is happening nevertheless. The COP has come and gone. I wasn't disappointed because I never expected anything at all from the COP. But we've seen from the years that the usefulness of the COP is for non-state actors to have opportunity of meeting, to strategize and find new ways of putting pressure on the system to bring about the changes that we need. I want to applaud the resistance for the Egyptian civil society. Their strength despite the situation they're fighting in, and that must be acknowledged. And regrettably, human rights didn't go beyond the preamble of the outcome, and we still have our comrades still in prison or in detention. That's very unfortunate. What I've seen a lot of people saying there's cautious optimism about the outcome, but I don't really see where the optimism comes from, because even the loss and damage, which has been the bright spot of the outcome and which is being celebrated, is, if you read the history of the demands for loss and damage, which I would say may have started with the debate and the campaigns for climate debt, which the polluting nations have stoutly rejected. And even before this loss and damage was put in place, was inserted into the text, in the final text, it's been said by top negotiators from the US and from other countries that the issue of historical responsibility is not part of this. History of liability for harm is not part of this. So if there's no liability for damage, for losses, and if there's no clear indication that loss and damage can be both historical and current, then it does mean that the rich nations are going to present loss and damage as charity. But I mean, if the idea of liability is not there, then what is it? It means they're just sending £1 million, £2 million that we saw some nations making pledges to do. So it's really, really very shocking. Of course, and the issue of the loss and damage would be to operationalize it, would begin to be debated at COP28. And who knows, it could be further kicked down the road to COP29, except they are held to account and held very tightly. The other issue that we are also especially disappointed was that in the last hours of the discussion, negotiations, it was appearing like the COP would for once acknowledge the fact that fossil fuels must be phased out, not just phasing down coal and not just phasing down subsidies, but phasing down the dependence of fossil fuels. To some of us, it's not just about the issue of the carbon and the greenhouse gas. It's also about the destruction in communities where these fossil fuel resources are extracted. So having a final text that did not acknowledge that fossil fuels must be phased out, I think was a monumental failure. Because what is it about? What is the climate negotiation about? We can't be talking about temperature targets without tackling the fundamental cause of the harm or of the problem. So with just those 2 points, I'm extremely, did I say I wasn't going to be disappointed? But I think it was really a sham COP at Sham El Sheikh. The other issue that I find very interesting is in the preambles when they refer to climate justice, they always have it in quotes. In Glasgow, climate justice was in quotes. In Sham El Sheikh, the climate justice was also in quotes. What's the indication of that? It means that the negotiators, the government, don't actually, either they don't know what climate justice is, or they don't want to acknowledge that there is an injustice in the whole scheme. They don't want to acknowledge that this must be why they had the common but differentiated responsibilities and differing capabilities in the framework itself. And so coming to me, I believe that it's not too early to begin to plan what to do going forward. And we all have to do a lot organizing nationally and then connect with other nations and see either to have a major counter COP globally or find other ways of legitimizing this failed COP that has been failing over and over again. And finally, before I drop off, the issue of the voluntary emissions cut. I think we have to denounce the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, because from the emissions gap report, just confirming what we always thought and knew, nations are not really ready to take climate action. The COP has been a carbon trade fair, and there's nothing more than that. As you said, Dorothy, you have leaders of oil companies on national delegations as negotiators. That is truly horrible. So thank you so much, and I send you strength all the way from Lagos.
Thank you, Nemo. Thank you for that presentation. Nemo is one of the veterans of the COP. Those who for many years now have followed, have raised voice in making the COP be more closer to the aspirations of civil society and social movements. But of course, that is not happening. And the thing that most people ask us is, if the COP is that bad, how come you still go? And we're saying often that the presence of civil society, it's not like a silver bullet, that because we were there, things will change. But rather, we were there so that we can pressure our own governments as well to represent the aspirations of the people. We are also there so that to raise our voices. We were also there to push the other governments from taking in some of the positions that they would rather not go. So in the words of many who go there, we say we go there so it will not be the worst. So to prevent the worst, we try to go to be there. I would now want
لم يكن أي من المتابعين يتوقع نجاح
none
المؤتمر
of the observers
بعد 26
anticipated
مؤتمر تموا من قبله. خصوصا وان الظروف الاقتصاديه
nobody expected the success of COP27, especially that there were 26 COPs before it. Plus, due to the economic situation, the global economic situation, people didn't expect the success of COP27, especially that there is less space for dialogue, especially regarding the loss and damage issue and the reduction of GHG. And
رسمت مسار يبدو لي انه بلا نهايه والى جوله اخرى يعني عشرات السنوات حوالي 30
several years have passed, about 30 years of meetings and dialogues and Glasgow Convention and Warsaw Mechanism. In many terms, it is not stalling, but it's like escaping forward. Corporate companies and developed companies, they all know that we will not be able to reduce the emissions of CO2 and GHG unless we give up the use of fossil fuel. However, since 10 years ago, the production of oil and gas is increasing, and it will reach its maximum production by in the next 10 years. So whether we make it or not, there will be COP38 and COP24. Then at the very end, gradually eventually people understand it's not about words. There has to be a legal frame to be put in place, and hence I would like people to go to raise the situation to move it forward and to give it a legal flame. Hence the legal frame whether it is about loss and damage, as long as we are dealing within national frames, not international frames, then it will be endless. As long as we're not organized, unless we are able through the international justice mission to force countries to work on the issue of climate change, this problem will not be solved. They have promised before that they will provide $100 billion, and they didn't meet their promise. And they said that now that there will be a loss and damage fund. And I am afraid that they will not be able to fulfill their promise, because the only solution for those countries to meet, the only way for those countries to meet their promise is to stop the use of fossil fuel, oil and gas. As long as there is no other feasible solution in front of them to stop using such pollutants, there will be no choice. Since 1989, such countries, some countries says that we need funds. Africa is responsible only for 3% of global pollutants. However, we are paying a high price. The last flood that we have faced, which is an ultimatum towards the coming global changes that third world countries are facing, is just a warning that involves the displacement of 40 million people that have been forced to leave their homes. As long as we do not change the legal frame, this problem will persist. Unless multinational corporates and countries are forced to abide by a legal frame, they will continue playing their role in drawing agreements, and will be within this vicious circle while they are maximizing their profits. Perhaps we should now look at China as a player in the transforming into the market of cleaner energy as a major source for solar panels. And since they are contributing by up to 40% of all components of electrical vehicles, to me it seems that the issue of climate issue has been kidnapped, and we are in front of two choices: is either to keep capitalism in place, and we are just slaves.
Thank you for that intervention. Actually, we will discuss all these on the next session when we look at how can we change the economy, because if we would look at the conditions we have and this conference of parties that is happening annually, there is a very, very strong link between the way that the economy is run and the increasing impacts of climate change. In fact, as what the Secretary General has mentioned of the UN, we are on a fast moving train to hell, and while our feet are not touching the brake, it's on the full speed ahead. And if we talk about the remaining carbon budget, if we talk about are we meeting the minimum 1.5 degrees centigrade global temperature increase by the end of the century, we don't have that much time actually. What we are looking now is what is happening now is at 1.2 degrees centigrade. And the Series 1 international assessment report of the intergovernment panel on climate change has been giving us warnings. We are now on the 6 warnings saying that if we continue in this economic model and approaches, we are losing time.